If Kirby Smart, who had trouble with one program and one program only so far in his career, and that's Alabama under Nick Saban, if he goes into Tuscaloosa and loses the first matchup he has with the new guy, I can tell you, because I'm from the state of Georgia, I can tell you confidently, those folks don't care if you rank their program number one in the country. If there's still this elephant, pun intended, in the room that they can't quite get past, in their mind, the rest of it's irrelevant because they don't want to be second best.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Hi, I'm Ben Flanagan. Welcome to Beat Everyone. He is one of the preeminent voices in all of college football, a YouTube, a social media sensation, the host of Josh Pate's college football show with CBS Sports. We're big fans of this guy and love seeing where he's headed right now. Josh Pate, welcome. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate you having me, man. You're coming off a Wisconsin game. Like, how rarely do we get to say that about Alabama football, a trip up north? What a welcome change.
Amazing, something that we had never done before, and we'd be glad to do again. It was so much fun. I think all the Alabama fans would love to go back up to Madison and relive the same thing over and over. Josh, going into this season, you had Alabama as a likely playoff team. Best case scenario, you said, was 11-1, and most likely 10-2, and a playoff appearance. Has anything that you've seen changed that opinion so far?
No, I think they're tracking right where I expected. I think most people expected. Certainly no one had penciled in a loss already. The one thing I think in a blowout win over Wisconsin that you can take away that's never talked about in a preview magazine or anything like that, but I think it's really crucial to these contending teams, is Kalen DeBoer afterwards. I know you listened to his press conference, but if people didn't, he talked about being validated and feeling validated in the overall competitive character and consistent intensity level of the team. Now, I think that stuff just kind of, it sounds like coach speak. It goes over a lot of people's heads until you turn on a Florida State game, until you turn on an Oregon game early in the season and you look and you see, well, Oregon may be a bad example because they've been playing at a high enough level. They just haven't been executing at a high enough level. But some of these teams do not bring first to fourth quarter intensity. And you just take that for granted. Like in college football, you just take for granted, oh, they'll have that, man. Everyone's pumped up to play. Well, no, they're not. Proportionately, no, they're not. And so to see, from Kalen DeBoer's vantage point, to see that validated, like, I think I've got this kind of team in spring. I think I've got this kind of team in fall camp. But for them to see it, and to see it maybe when a game gets a little lopsided, it's what Nick Saban used to always talk about, consistency in performance, no matter the scoreboard. I think that is a critical part of any team that's going to end up in the playoff, any team that's going to compete for a national championship or even the SEC, because there are going to be enough teams that have that if you don't have it, it'll filter you out pretty quickly.
Josh, you said that you didn't think the Saban drop-off would be a story in 2024, and that if it does exist, it would be more of a story in 2025 or later. Do you believe in the eye test there? Like, do you see a noticeable difference between this team and even what you saw as recently as last year? And if you didn't know who was coaching, would it be obvious to you that this isn't a Nick Saban coach team and that it is a Kalen DeBoer coach team?
On the periphery, yeah. I think it's obvious, not so much in style of play. Offensively, like there are some things that a more football-trained eye would see. But if we're talking broad strokes, I think the thing that stands out the most is how the team carries itself between the whistles or post-whistle to pre-whistle. Scoring a touchdown, probably a little more celebratory than they would have been in years past. Stuff like that, just little trappings here and there. You would have thought, man, Saban must be on vacation this week. Or, well, what happened here? Did he just all of a sudden loosen up? So that stuff really doesn't matter. As far as the football piece, no, they're what they should be. And I think even we would watch this and we would say, wow, if we didn't know, good for Nick Saban. He's really upgraded that offensive line. Good for Nick Saban. Jalen Milroe, I think he's been sacked 4 times this year. He's been sacked 5 times this year. He was sacked 4 times in 8 different games last year. So, I'd be talking about how much he upgraded certain parts of the team.
Yeah, and you said about Alabama's passing game, they can dump it underneath and they can burn you over the top and they've got the speed to take it to the house, but the intermediate passing game just isn't there right now. And we've obviously seen that big playability with Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Kobe Prentice, but despite having the personnel and the ability to score fast with explosive plays, do you think that could hurt them in the long run? Isn't that kind of like living and dying by the three in basketball? We had Roman Harper on recently, and he told us that he was concerned whether or not Alabama could find any offensive rhythm because they've hardly executed any sustained drives when they're scoring in one or two plays.
It's a red flag. It's kind of a blinking red light. It doesn't have to be detrimental, but it is a concern of mine. And I mentioned Oregon for the second time. You think I was talking to you from Portland, but I think there's a similar theme with them that I've seen early in the year. They kind of did away with it a little bit this past weekend, but a team like Oregon, a team like Alabama, you watch them, and they have the explosive nature. They have that capability. It's like living downstream of a faulty dam. Even if it's dry right now, you know at any given second the flood could come. Well, that's what it's like playing against Alabama. Any second, boom, they could pop you. Having said that, the best teams in the country have the kind of defenses that can really limit that. And what happens if you're relying on scoring in bunches and chunk plays rather, and you can't sustain drives is someone could do what I call throwing the crowbar in the bicycle spokes. And when you have teams that are disproportionately reliant on explosive scoring and can't sustain 8, 10, 12 play drives, then they don't slow down. Those offenses don't slow down. They are very susceptible to grinding to an absolute halt. Because if one thing gets taken away, they got the fastball and they got nothing else. And that's a little extreme example, but it's not all that far from reality. And that's how you could turn on an Alabama-Georgia game or an Alabama-Texas game or whoever they would play. And you say, wow, like 6 points early in the third quarter, what's happening here? Well, that's probably what's happened. People are forcing you to beat them with your weakness. And I hear the same thing you do. I hear people saying, boy, when's the intermediate pass game going to show up? Where is it? Well, the answer is it's probably not going to show up. I mean, this is the profile of the team. Everyone's got a weakness. This may be theirs. Your job as a coaching staff, this isn't anything DeBoer doesn't know, but just speaking in general, your job is coach your team to its strengths, leverage those strengths, mask your weaknesses as much as you can, and go win every game you play, or at least try to.
Well, on that note, what does a Kalen DeBoer and obviously a Nick Sheridan offense, what does that do that a recent Nick Saban team didn't? Like, especially in the last few years with Bill O'Brien and Tommy Rees calling the plays, like, how do you think it suits Jalen Milroe's skill set specifically, and how does it level up when you have weapons like Alabama does on the current roster?
I don't think they'll be bashful about utilizing Milroe's legs in a designed way, but I also think, especially when I watched Bill O'Brien's last year there, I got nothing against Bill O'Brien. I think he gets criticized. He may not get criticized enough for his inability to scheme yardage, for his ability to scheme plays open. A lot of the offensive numbers do not tell the whole story because they're Bryce Young numbers. How much of their production came on broken offensive plays, in other words, which has nothing to do with the play that was called. So with Milroe, I think what hopefully a Sheridan or DeBoer offense, however you want to look at it, utilizes is not just Milroe, but understanding there's production all around him. And there are different ways to get yards, before, after catch, etc. And like a guy like Kendrick Law is a guy that I still think could explode this year. He is doing incredible work blocking on the perimeter. He flashed last game, I believe, with a touchdown. But I just think of guys like that as an example. Everyone's talking about Williams. Everyone's talking about Jeremy Bernard. There are a couple more guys. Kobe Prentice. Like, there are a couple more guys. Who's the running back? Emmanuel Henderson, I believe it is.
Emmanuel Henderson, wide receiver. Jam Miller, Justice Haynes at running back. Yep.
Like that was a running back that they transitioned to receiver. And when he touched the ball the other day, I'm watching the replay on the flight home. He just like pops off the screen where if you saw that with like Texas State or even Oklahoma State, you'd say, wow, that looks like one of the best players in the country. And he's just kind of there at Alabama. So my point is, if they're any good at what they do, and they are very good at what they do, they find a way to get the ball in those guys' hands. It doesn't have to be 20, 30 yards downfield. It can be behind the line of scrimmage, but you got to let them touch the ball as much as they can because the mathematics overwhelmingly tilt in your advantage the more those guys have the ball in their hands because 98% of the time they're facing an inferior athlete trying to tackle them.
Well, Josh, on Jalen Milroe specifically, what differences or improvements do you see in him so far? Before the season began, you said that you had some confidence in his ability to distribute the ball. He had a good year last year, and he seems very comfortable with Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan. But what strides did you want to see him take in his second year as the Alabama starter? And what have you noticed about how he runs this offense compared to 2023?
It's no accident that he hasn't been on his back as much. And that's a little bit to do with him. Frankly, part of the reason I said that is because I thought he'd have better protection. So part of Jalen Milroe's improvement is not even on Jalen Milroe. It's me thinking he can get the ball snapped to him correctly. It's me thinking that he can get a fourth to a quarter half, 3/4 second more time on average to throw the ball. So that's not going to mean he's perfect. But if you combine that, if you combine external factors improving with hopefully just your normal year 1 to year 2 as a starter progression, and also keep in mind the system he's in and what it's done with other quarterbacks in the past. So if he does nothing but follow that trajectory, and then you combine that with better quarterback to center exchange and better offensive line protection, to me, those were all the recipes. As long as a guy keeps his head on straight, which by all accounts he does, as long as a guy does that, then I don't know how you couldn't expect progression, barring injury. So early on, I think it's been a cumulative effect of all those elements that we've seen thrown into a blender, and then you pour it out, and voila, 5 sacks so far, 14 touchdowns, I think no interceptions so far. It's imperfect. It shouldn't be perfect this early in the year because you don't want to peak this early in the year, but it's comforting to see.
Josh, you said barring injury. You also noted Alabama is much more vulnerable to injury this year because their depth is not on par with other playoff contenders like Texas and Georgia and others that have loaded rosters. Other than quarterback, and Alabama does have talent in the quarterback room with Ty Simpson sitting right there. Which position do you find most worrisome if there is an injury here and there with Alabama's depth being tested?
Offensive line, because we've already seen it. It's ironic you mentioned Georgia there. So Georgia plays Kentucky down to the wire this past weekend as you and I are talking. And afterwards, Kirby says, we were in a very dangerous position coming into this game. And then you saw it play out. They had 3 defensive linemen play 50-plus snaps against Kentucky. The next closest guy played 17. So what happens if one of those guys goes down? Well, on Alabama's side, same thing. They're not the only one that has a thin nature of an offensive line right now. That's the portal era. But if you have Caden go down, if you have Tyler Booker go down, Brailsford at center, if they go down, if they miss even a quarter, much less games, the drop-off is just a little bit steeper, as I see it, because I haven't seen the guys play, but I get the keen sense that the drop-off may be a little steeper in production between level 1 to level 2 than it has been on some Alabama offensive lines in the past.
Looking ahead to Georgia in a couple of weeks, will the result with that game tell you more about Alabama or Georgia? Like, which team needs to answer more questions about 2024? As in, like, if Alabama wins, they're ahead of schedule and bigger playoff contenders than we realized, and Georgia has taken a step back 2 years removed from winning back-to-back national titles. But if Georgia wins, Kirby still has it rolling in Athens, and Kalen DeBoer deserves a little patience in his first year.
The answer is clearly Georgia to me. I think there's far more pressure on them. It's not that you get a grace period in year 1, but if you lose a game to the number 1 or 2 or whatever team in the country in year 1, you did just that. You lost to one of the best programs in the country in year 1. But if Kirby Smart, who had trouble with one program and one program only so far in his career, and that's Alabama under Nick Saban, if he goes into Tuscaloosa and loses the first matchup he has with the new guy, I can tell you, because I'm from the state of Georgia, I can tell you confidently, those folks don't care if you rank their program number 1 in the country. If there's still this elephant, pun intended, in the room that they can't quite get past, in their mind, the rest of it's irrelevant because they don't want to be second best. They view this as their window. And especially once Nick Saban retires, this is supposed to be the stretch. There's no other obstacle in the way. This is supposed to be the stretch where Kirby rattles off, his career is already defined, but a career-defining, legacy-type stretch of the next few years. There's supposed to be multiple titles in the next few years, and if Alabama's still in the way, that is an infinitely bigger headline. Now, the other thing that I don't know that people have realized or they don't appreciate yet is this game's going to be awesome, but we do not have the 100-foot-high tightrope vibe around it. Like, if you fall, you fall. You fell 10 feet, you got a loss. You can afford to lose one more at least. Maybe 2, depending on how the playoff picture shakes out. So it's not that do or die maximum sense of urgency, but when Georgia and Alabama play, as you well know, there's almost like this separate vibe. It's like it's a one-game season. It exists in and of itself. It's the way Bama LSU games used to feel back in the mid-2010s. So by that sense, it's going to be incredible. But I think significantly more pressures on the Georgia side.
And we know the stakes with this game, but if you could pick another game left on Alabama's regular season schedule, what matchup stands out as like a gut check game where you think you'll learn a lot about Alabama and their opponent maybe through the prism of the college football playoff picture?
The game at Oklahoma late in the year, because that's one that I think many people would look at and say, Oklahoma hasn't been incredibly impressive so far. Their over-under win total was 7.5 to 8.5, depending on when you looked at it in the preseason. And late in the year, Oklahoma probably has a few losses on their resume. But it's a late season road game before the Iron Bowl. And I think about Bama just going on the road to Auburn against inferior Auburn teams late in the season, as recently as last year. And I look at how down to the wire that is, and how lucky you are, skilled luck, to escape with a win. And I wonder what the profile of a Kalen DeBoer Alabama team will be. Because he played a ton of one-possession games at Washington last year en route to playing for a national title. There were a lot of down-to-the-wire games. Well, that's because he didn't have a significant talent edge. You do have a talent edge at Alabama over most of the teams you play. So what I'm saying is, proportionately, if your team is playing to the Kalen DeBoer standard, is it consistent? Like, do you get that consistent level of performance? And I don't have to worry about that against Georgia. I'm not saying I'm worried about it against teams like Oklahoma, but I will be very curious that late in the year when your profile should be made, how do you handle yourself on the road in November, first time you've ever been to a venue, the week before your rival, and maybe 2 weeks before an SEC championship game trip for all we know?
Great point. And Josh, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Does Alabama win a national championship under Kalen DeBoer?
Yes. Yes, they will. I also think that there is a world, if you're thinking of us talking in terms of a documentary right now, if we're 20 years down the road and we're telling the story of the Saban era and the transition to DeBoer, this is supposed to be impossible. This is supposed to be the greatest of all time steps down, and then the program never recreates the magic it had. And the program's in the wilderness for the next however many years. And there's no way to know what the future holds, but if Kalen DeBoer really has taken this baton handoff as seamless as it appears he has, and if Greg Byrne facilitated that baton handoff as seamlessly as it seems like he did, you're talking about one of the all-time stories in the history of college athletics. This is a university athletic department that could not get out of its own way for years and years and years of my childhood. And then as I grow into adulthood, and it's through the Nick Saban era, if they hand that thing off and they never falter and they never stumble and they never, relinquish their perch as one of the top programs in the sport, that's really almost unprecedented. Like in the history of college athletics, how often have we seen that be able to happen? Normally, you've got a bunch of entitlism and rot and negligence for doing things at a high enough level when the greatest of all time steps down and it just gets exposed once he's out the door. I haven't seen any of that so far.
Yeah, for sure. Great point. Josh, my last question for you. I want to pull back the curtain just a little bit. How do you pick which game to watch live? Like you said on your show, you had Alabama and Wisconsin circled. You had credentials, you booked a hotel, you booked a flight, and then you swerved when you thought it was trending like a blowout, and you were right, obviously. Do you just want to see the most competitive game between two good teams? Like, do you have bucket list stadiums, cities, rivalry games? You could watch everything remotely, but you'd obviously rather be somewhere in person. What goes into that decision?
Yeah, it's a little of all of what you mentioned. I grew up watching the games on TV. I could never afford to go to any of them. So my dream, I think every college football fan's dream is, what if I could just pick whatever game I go to and get a sideline pass for it every week? So now that we're in that position, it would be like a dereliction of duty for me to sit home. I look at the games. I do want to see a competitive game. I want to see it decided in the fourth quarter. I want to put myself in position where I'm at probably the biggest game in the country. I also want to go to as many places and see as many teams in a given year as I can. And so this week, the bucket list you talked about, Oklahoma's been there forever. I've been in Oklahoma storm chasing because it's one of my hobbies. So I've been there many times storm chasing. I've never been to a football game in the state, University of Oklahoma or Oklahoma State. So Tennessee's going over there. Heupel returning. 7:30 Eastern primetime kick over there. Like, the place should be insane. And a lot of times what I find is my first visit to a place just happens to coincide with it being like the best it's been. Like I've been to Ohio State, Michigan the last 3 years. Well, you're experiencing those places at their very best. You're experiencing the pinnacle of what those venues have to offer, and I expect nothing less from Oklahoma Saturday night.
Incredible. I did not know about the storm chasing thing, so I'll just say, Josh, be careful out there, man. The host of Josh Pate's college football show with CBS Sports. Catch the live show each Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Josh Pate, you're a machine, man. We're big fans of you. We love what you do. Keep up the great work, and thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Hey, I appreciate you having me this morning.
Hey, this is Ben Flanagan, and I'm here with Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici, and we are fresh off of Alabama's 42-10 blowout win over Wisconsin in Madison. Matt, I mean, Alabama answered a lot of questions.
Yeah, for sure. I think going into it, especially off of that South Florida game, there were lots of reasons for skepticism. Some of the same problems that plagued the team last year seemed like maybe they were still lingering. And I think there are still questions about this Alabama team, but what we know for sure now is their explosiveness on both sides of the ball is going to make them dangerous to every single team on their schedule. Alabama's not a perfect team, but they at their top end, they are extremely dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. And this was a big question mark on the schedule for me going into the season. You had all these people saying, well, what about Georgia? That Georgia game, it's like, we don't know what's going to happen under Kalen DeBoer. We don't know what this team's going to look like. Players have left. They've brought guys in from the transfer portal. They have a strong recruiting class, but we still have no idea. It's a huge question mark. And so the first time they play a Power 5 conference team, that is going to answer a lot of questions. And this could be a close game. Alabama could maybe even lose this game. But I think, like, you forget just how much talent was still on the Alabama roster. And when you have a coach who is as gifted as Kalen DeBoer and the staff that he's put together and the buy-in that you've gotten from the players, they showed that Alabama is still separated from a large portion of the college football landscape, including even Big Ten teams like Wisconsin. And they're certainly not on the level of Alabama players, but you see Alabama's offense seem to be clicking in a lot of ways. We've had Roman Harper on, and obviously Josh Pate has told us here that Alabama still hasn't quite found consistency and offensive rhythm. They're not humming in the way that some of these offenses that put together sustained drives are able to do, that Nick Saban offenses were able to do throughout his tenure. They score on explosive plays, and Jalen Milroe's completions and attempts are limited considering the one-sidedness of the games. But Alabama outgains Wisconsin 407-290 in the game. Milroe has a balanced performance and attack. He throws for 196 yards. He throws for 3 touchdowns. He runs for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. So quite a performance from Jalen Milroe specifically.
Yeah, and they used Jalen Milroe a lot, I would say, as their power running game. And I'm not sure how sustainable that is as a long-term strategy, but it definitely worked against Wisconsin. It's been effective in the other games to open this season so far. They particularly seem to love using him near the end zone in goal line situations or close red zone situations to go to Jalen as the designed runner on a play. And it makes sense. It gives you a numbers advantage. I think, and I hate to pivot away from your focus on the positive from this game, Ben. I think where there are still some issues and questions for me watching this offense, it's the same things that we talked about last year. I think the intermediate passing game is still a question mark just because we haven't really seen it executed. Hasn't stopped them from scoring really, but it hasn't been a strength of this team so far. And I don't know that they're particularly consistent at running the ball. The end, the final stats look great when it comes to the running backs and the run game in general, and they have a great average yards per carry for everyone involved. And a lot of that is due to the fact that when they break a run successfully, they get big chunks. They are very explosive, and it's because they have these incredibly talented skill position players. But my big question is, in a tight game, which Alabama has not really found itself in yet, Can this team sort of line up and kill 5 minutes of clock time and end a game? And we just haven't seen them do it. I haven't seen them do anything that looks like it, but they haven't had to so far.
Yeah, I think the closest thing we've seen in a big game from an Alabama team with players that were on last year's roster and this roster was the end of the SEC championship game against Georgia.
Yeah.
Jalen Milroe used his legs so effectively to control the clock, control the tempo, and really put that game on ice. And so, I think it's worrisome when Jalen Milroe is leading the team in carries and is sort of like, everybody wants to see him use his legs and use his speed and athleticism, and they want to see designed runs from him. But a big concern about doing that from the quarterback position are the hits he's going to take. And
Right.
Jalen Milroe the dude he's built. This dude just has muscles for days and is just an incredible athlete. But, when you take that many hits, especially when you're in that position, it adds up in the end. And you've got workhorses like Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, and we saw Richard Young get some touches in this game, even though he did sustain an injury, and we're going to hopefully hear about his status pretty soon. But you've got Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, and they combined for 11 carries in the game, which is combined is fewer than Jalen Milroe. Justice Haynes only has 2 carries for 17 yards. One of them was a big first down run, so you have to wonder if he even got a little banged up. So we'll see. But, that was also one of the storylines in this game, Matt, where there were injuries. Finally, 3 games into the season, it's football, it happens. But Alabama's depth is obviously a source for concern for a lot of fans and a lot of skeptics about this team. And you saw Malachi Moore go down. You saw Richard Young go down. You saw a couple of defensive players go down. So injuries is not something that this team can afford.
No, although, as Kalen DeBoer said after the game, if they're going to happen, you want them to happen going into a bye week where they have 2 weeks to recover. Hopefully there's good news to come on all of those injuries. I think they felt pretty confident Malachi Moore was going to be okay. It was concussion protocol essentially was what kept him out of the game. We hope he's okay. But typically that works itself out pretty quickly. I think the leg injuries are the bigger concern, and by the time this podcast comes out, you may have already heard the news on it or not. I think so far Alabama seems, and we haven't really gotten into the defense yet, there seems to be a lot of depth in the front seven generally. There's a lot of guys who are getting their name called when it comes to pass rush and making tackles behind the line. And this is a very aggressive group so far. I think there's probably more depth concern in the secondary, but so far all the guys back there that we've seen playing are also very explosive in their own way. They are making big plays, which is something we haven't really seen out of this Alabama defense in the past couple of years. We're certainly a solid unit, but they were not doing the kinds of things that we're seeing this group do of forcing turnovers and making big negative plays on first and second down that totally destroy drives. These guys are playing at a different level, I think, than we've seen in the sort of latter part of the Nick Saban tenure.
Yeah, 2 forced fumbles and recoveries. Q Robinson was flying all over the field on Saturday. Xavier Brown had a recovery too, but Alabama's inside linebackers, or linebackers, I should say, Jihad Campbell and Deontay Lawson flying all over the field. Amazing lateral quickness.
And they have kept opposing quarterbacks in absolute hell so far this year. Nobody has gotten a chance to get comfortable. This Wisconsin backup that came in had a few instances where he got the ball out very quickly and made some nice plays in the middle of the field. But for the most part, you could tell they got in his head early, and it really affected the way that Wisconsin called the rest of the game, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And we should note, the starting quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, went down in the first quarter. He was 5 for 5 short passes for 16 yards, and then Braden Locke comes in, and it's a tough assignment. He played relatively well, I guess, but they just couldn't really move the ball other than a drive kind of in relative garbage time when they kind of just kept running it and kind of rammed it down Alabama's throat for one series, but I'm telling you, man, like the Alabama defense, I think that they have proved a lot of doubters wrong so far this season. I mean, there's a lot left on the schedule. There are a lot more talented offenses that they're going to play, but I mentioned those guys, Jahad Camlin, Deontay Lawson, Malachi Moore has looked fantastic so far, the transfer, Keon Saab. LT Overton with a huge game and such a monster sack in this game, forced another fumble that Alabama didn't recover. Defensive line, I think, has really shown up so far this year in ways that people I don't think really expected. I mentioned Overton, obviously. Tim Keenan has been a big player. Tim Smith has been a big player. So Alabama's got defensive stars.
And working great as a unit, too. I mean, that fourth down stop, I think that's a very momentous thing for this team to have done early in the season, and it's going to give them a ton of confidence in themselves. This is a group that, I mean, you hear the term bend but don't break, but I think people sometimes kind of say it almost sarcastically, but I think that's what these guys are so far. I mean, it's so tough to get it in the end zone on this group so far, and it's been a variety of different styles of attack going at them. And, you know, I think Wisconsin tried to do a couple of different things. I think they tried some short passing game. They tried some power run. None of it was working against these guys. You know, South Florida had a mobile quarterback who was able to make some plays between the 20s, and Alabama really shut it down as things closed in the red zone. So they have, I think, I mean, I'm honestly kind of excited to get the chance to see this coaching staff and these Alabama teams play out over a full season, over 3 seasons, and learn what the identity is of the Kalen DeBoer version of Alabama. Because right now, every week is kind of a total surprise to us as we're watching. But you maybe can start to get a sense of some kind of identity. And you know, look, we'll learn a lot more about them when they play the really tough teams on the schedule, starting with Georgia in a couple of weeks. But there is a sense to me that this is a very aggressive defense that is able to make big plays and change the game from that standpoint. And I think also doesn't tend to allow big explosive plays from the other team. I think offensively, obviously, these guys are kind of boom or bust so far. You've seen a lot of 3 and outs, and you're seeing a lot of 2-play, 75-yard touchdown drives where they just immediately explode in your face. I think it's not surprising to me that you're not hearing sort of national media talk as much about this Alabama team and still take a bit of a wait and see approach, because I don't think people 100% get what this Alabama team is yet.
Yeah, and in the third phase of the game, I want to mention real quick, we had one punt return from Alabama on the day, and it was Ryan Williams, relatively late. I don't think anybody expected him to return a punt at any point this season, let alone late against Wisconsin, but he returned it for 20 yards. It was very impressive. And then you also had James Burnap, the punter. He had an outstanding day. He punted 5 times, averaged nearly 50 yards. His long was 64 yards. Fantastic. But of note, Graham Nicholson gets a field goal attempt in the game, and he misses it. He was 6 of 6 from extra points. But, yeah, first field goal of the year, or attempt, I believe, of the year, unless I'm probably missing one from the South Florida game.
No, that was, you're right. It was his first attempt of the year, yeah.
And yeah, he missed it this time, but I have to think that he's gonna correct those things, and he's going to have a great season. So
yeah,
we'll
look, I don't think you got to be worried about the kicker right now. I think he's got a long track record and proof that he's a good kicker. And I understand Alabama fans have understandable paranoia about that, but this is a guy who has a long track record of being a very consistent kicker. Look, it was not the easiest situation in the world, but you're right though. Burnap is a weapon, man. He changed this game as much as any player on the defense did, I think. And those punts, they're not exciting, and I don't mean to sound like a Big Ten fan over here, but those are game-changing plays when he's able to flip the field like that.
Oh man, Iowa watched this game, and their coach was like, "Get him on the phone. We need him here."
Throwing the entire NIL budget at James Burnip, yeah.
Some Alabama fans were actually kind of excited about the missed field goal because they were like, I saw somebody on Twitter say something like, Alabama's blowing out the team and they missed a kick. We're back, baby. This is what we do. But last thing I want to mention, Matt, or ask you anyway, were you as impressed with the jump around tradition as the Alabama players were from the field inside that stadium?
I think that there was at least. I was funny because Ben, an Auburn fan friend of mine, texted me during the game and said, "I have to admit, I thought that was really cool that the Alabama players were having fun and enjoying that. That's really not what I, an Auburn fan, expect from Alabama." And I was like, well, first of all, I appreciate that you can admit that, but also I think it's important that you recognize the real truth of the Alabama identity, which is that I think at least some of those players were doing this mockingly. And that was confirmed after the game, by the way. I can't remember who it was that said this, but basically said, yeah, we got tired of hearing people talk about it all week and we were making fun of them.
That was Jeremy Bernard, the wide receiver,
Yes.
who said that because, yeah, apparently they blasted that music, I'm sure, inside the practice facility for those guys to get sick of it, get them mad when they heard it. But, you know,
however you want to interpret it, like I think that probably some of those guys are just like, hey, this is fun, let's do this. Everybody else is doing it, and some of them were being bullies, and
Yes.
I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a earmark of an ass whipping way, as Nick Saban would put it. They were looking around at a mostly emptying out stadium, and they were saying, "Hey, we did it. We came here to we did what we came here to do."
Yeah, it was. That place was empty pretty much by the fourth quarter, at least in the student section. But, you know, listen, it's a great tradition. It's fine. Everybody can have their fun traditions and everything. It's just not great when the opposing team's players are having more fun with it than the people inside the stadium who it's all designed for.
Yeah,
So,
if Alabama can play a Green Day song to start the fourth quarter, Wisconsin can play House of Pain. That's fine.
For sure. Okay, well, I think that's a good note to wrap it up with, Matt. We've got 3 games in the books now. Alabama's 3-0. Big win coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about it really soon. But it's the bye week, so everybody enjoy your bye week. But we're not taking a week off, and we'll be back very soon here on Beat Everyone. You can subscribe to this show on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get it. Matt Scalici, producer extraordinaire, thanks for joining me here, and we'll see you all next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.